I'm one of those unusual people that knew what they wanted to be when they were a young child. All my networks that I'd built up in private practice, they were gone. I needed that harsh reality lesson right in the beginning. Would you go back and want any of your bad luck to have changed? 99.9% of people say no, I don't want a single thing changed. There are times in life where people will come to you for advice, listen to the advice and go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then just go back to doing the exact opposite, which they intended to do in the first place.
True.
And if you fall over head over heels in love, go to Vegas, you've been together for 3 days, you get married before a midget Elvis in Las Vegas. You are now married in the eyes of the law.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Real Biz Life Chronicles, where we discuss all things business, branding, and life from the Horizon Digital podcast recording studio here in Perth. I'm your host, Tracy Fryer. Now, if you do enjoy this episode, we please ask that you like and subscribe to our channel below, or share this episode with a fellow business owner who is doing one of the hardest things in the world, building a business. Today, I'm joined by someone who has spent over 20 years mastering the art of law navigation, everything from commercial litigation to family law, business acquisitions to boardroom negotiations. He is the founder of Procopio Legal and has built his career on sharp legal expertise, unwavering integrity, and a deep commitment to his clients. From working as a general counsel for a global company, to now running his own successful firm, he has seen the legal world from all angles. And as of February 2024, he has also taken on this prestigious role of public notary. But here's the thing, outside of law, he's not just about the courtroom or closing deals. You'll find him cooking up a storm, jamming on the guitar and bass, playing basketball, or nurturing his fruit trees. According to those that know this person, he is loyal, thoughtful, and supportive. The kind of guy who goes above and beyond for the people he cares about. We also asked one of those closest to him if there was a song that would play every time this person entered the room, what would it be? And she said, oh my goodness, it would be The Eye of a Tiger because, well, the man just doesn't back down from a challenge. Marcus Procopio, welcome.
Hi there, Tracy. What an absolute pleasure it is to be here. And I had no idea that that you had that person mention that particular song about me. So quite a surprise.
I did have a giggle. Obviously, having had the privilege to work with Candy and you on your branding and getting to know you, I think you're someone who your heart is in the right place. And I think it's through every time I've interacted with you or spoken to you, that really comes through everything that you do.
Oh, thank you very much, Tracy. That's absolutely wonderful of you to say. I've had a lot of less than pleasant things said about me during a career in law because it comes with the territory. It's water off a duck's back. So whenever people go out of their way to say nice things about you, it does mean a lot. So thank you. And thank you for having me on.
Of course. I know we booked this in some time ago, so I'm looking forward to our chat.
We did. Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely have to have a chat to Candy about why she picked that particular song as well. I take it as a compliment.
Of course. It's, she even said that you're loyal, thoughtful and supportive. And I think it's always nice to hear when someone else blows our horn as opposed to us doing it ourselves. Marcus, your legal career spans over 20 years and you've worked in everything from litigation to high-stakes business deals. But let's rewind. What originally drew you to law?
I'm one of those unusual people that knew what they wanted to be when they were a young child.
Yeah.
So I would have been about 6 or 7 years old and my mother told me what it is a lawyer does, and from that moment onwards I just knew that that's what I was going to be.
Yeah. And
so from that point at school, I took on my friends as my clients anytime they got into trouble with the teacher, so that if they got into trouble and they had to explain themselves, I would step in and say, well, I'm acting for this person.
I see.
If you have any questions, ask me and I'll answer them for you. And the teachers thought it was funny, of course, and then told me to go sit back down. And so everything I did from that point forward was geared towards being a lawyer. I was open to the possibility of rock star and professional athlete.
Yeah.
You know, they were. I was open to the idea, but it became pretty clear very early on that neither of those things were meant for me in this particular life. And so lawyer it definitely was. And by the time I got to year 12 and I had to select my university courses for the next year, and they get you to fill out the form and you have to pick 4 alternatives. And so obviously I said, okay, well, law at this university, law at that university, and I think there were only 2 available at the time. And then I chucked in a commerce, and then I didn't even fill in the rest. I said, whatever, you know, there's only one thing I'm going to be doing, and that's all that's on the table. And then I remember my teacher in political and legal studies going, you have to pick a 4th. What if the other ones don't work out? And I said to no, they will. There's no debate about it. Yeah. I'd rather go find myself for a year and come back and try my TE again or something. I don't know, whatever the option happened to be, but I was going to get into law school and be a lawyer. And then unsurprisingly for me, that's exactly what I did. So that's pretty much how I got into being a lawyer. It was something that I always knew I was going to do. And I see a lot of people when they're going through high school and even beyond that struggle to know what it is their calling in life is, and I definitely sympathise with them. It's a very common thing, and so if you're lucky enough not to have that as an issue, then you count your blessings in life. So.
And what was it that drew? Was it the idea of standing up for what you believe in, or standing up for someone?
There were multiple things that attracted me to being a lawyer. First and foremost, the idea of helping people. It feels good to help people.
Yeah, of course.
People that can't help themselves, you get a result, they're happy. Definitely that aspect of it. And while it won't necessarily by itself make you super wealthy, you're not going to worry about paying the bills, generally speaking, as long as you live a fairly steady kind of a life. You're not going to have to worry about the electricity bill. You can have a nice glass of red when you feel like it.
Yeah.
And so life generally is comfortable. And if you want to do all those extra things to become a billionaire, good for you. So then it was that kind of stability that I also found attractive to being a lawyer, saying, okay, I can help people, that'll make me feel good, and I won't have to worry about paying the bills, and I can live a fairly steady and comfortable life. All of those things mattered to me.
Yeah.
What I wasn't aware of was all the paperwork that I would have to be engaged in when the time came to actually do the being a lawyer bit.
Yeah.
And all I'd seen on television were criminal types of shows, like Matlock, for example, which is still a favourite of mine to this day. And I thought, I'm going to be a private investigator, and then I'm going to go into court, and then I'm going to find the person that framed my client, and I'm going to charge $100,000 within 4 days of work. And
yeah, that's it, done.
It sounds like a good life to me. And then the reality of what it meant to be a criminal lawyer was impressed upon me at university, and I thought, okay, I don't know that that's quite for me.
Yeah.
And then by the time I left university, I was willing to take practically any legal job going out there, because it's very difficult to get a job out of university from law school, and ended up practicing in commercial law, which is where I am to this day, having done a wide array of different types of commercial law, which isn't common. Yeah. But something that's definitely kept my mind engaged and fulfilled in this career to the point where I can say I certainly didn't pick the wrong one for me.
Good. Not like me, who studied art, the starving artist, baked beans and toast because I'm going to sit back and make paintings. Little did I know you have to die first and then you become famous. So you made the right choice.
Absolutely. It's funny how that economy works.
Yes, definitely. Anywho, so Marcus, you went from working in-house as general counsel for a global company to founding your own firm, Procopio Legal. What was the biggest mental shift you had to make in that transformation from employee to business owner?
trying to pick the biggest shift is like trying to pick the best grain of sand on Cottesloe Beach, because there were many, and so I can't say the most important or the biggest, but I can tell you the one that immediately sort of comes to mind was the reality of networking and building top line. It's not that I was ignorant of those things, but I came into setting up my own business from an in-house position where I literally had one client.
Sure.
That was my one and only exclusive client. And so when I came out to set up my own business, I was starting cold. All my networks that I'd built up in private practice before I took on that job, which I had for 6 years in-house, they were gone. I was off the face of the earth in witness protection as far as they were concerned. And I just had this one client for 6 years, came out and had to start cold. And that's not anything anyone would recommend in terms of setting up any business, basically. No. And usually the done thing in my experience, what I've seen lawyers do is they work at a firm, they build up the relationships with the clients, something happens or changes and they decide they want to set up their own business, and so they take a few clients with them, leave other clients at the firm, and then there's usually just that uneasy truce that gets formed where everyone uncomfortably lives with the separation. Yeah. Some handle it worse than others. Some get a little bit greedier than others. None of that applied to me. I basically had to start from scratch. And I thought, well, I've got a few dozen people in my network, that should be enough. And I was totally wrong, to put it mildly. And I remember someone asking me about my network and going through it, and they said, well, you might want to multiply that by about 10. Yes. Try that. Yeah. And in the beginning when I set up my practice, I don't want to use a word as harsh as failing, but I wasn't succeeding. And one could argue that I was failing. Yeah. It wasn't going the way that I wanted it to go. There were some good signs, but it wasn't going along the trajectory that suggested that this was going to sustainably succeed. And so something had to change. And so at that point, I merged my fledgling little practice into another law firm that had an outgoing partner, and I was going to take over their practice. And I thought, okay, this will work. And then 5 weeks later, I realised this is definitely not going to work. And so I was back to myself in an arguably worse position than when I started.
Oh, so you actually withdrew and then, right.
and then I had the decision to make, do I go back to the employed life of being a lawyer and go down that tried and true path that I just described to you to build up client relationships, et cetera, et cetera? Because much like being a lawyer or wanting to be a lawyer when I was a child, wanting to establish my own practice was just going to happen come hell or high water. Sure. If I had to go back to life as an employed solicitor, then I'll be back here in a year or two trying again. I just wasn't going to accept any other alternative.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
And I suppose you've got to want it when you set up your own enterprise like that. And so I had a decision to make, and I remember speaking to a colleague who gave me some incredible advice at the time. And I said, look, what do I do here? Clearly I'm not getting something. Something needs to change, and I'm not going to go back to my own practice unless I do some drastically different but simple different things to make it work. So obviously the networking was something I'd grossly underestimated. And I think the other thing I'd underestimated was this idea that if you just want to work from home in the beginning, you don't need a physical address. People aren't going to mind about that, and they do mind. They mind a lot. And to be fair, if I was in their position, I would mind too. And I just completely underestimated that. I just didn't think that was going to be an important part. So I set all of those things up, got more skin in the game in that regard, and then went on the largest possible coffee tour of Perth that I could possibly go on, and anybody and everybody was fair game at that point for a coffee.
Yes, been there too.
So those, I think, to answer your question that you'd asked, those are the big things that immediately jumped off the page. And then an amazing thing happened that as I was having these coffees with new people, strangers, old people that have fallen off the radar, I started to develop connections and relationships that I still have to this day.
Great.
8 years later, where a good bunch of them are friends, as well as people that gave me that really important leg up at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I'm glad for it all. I'm happy that it ended up the way that it did, but I needed that harsh reality lesson right in the beginning. And it seems a bit ridiculous that a commercial lawyer couldn't be onto these sorts of things and they don't dawn on you, but that's just how it goes. All I had ever been at that point was a grateful employee that said, right, I come in, I get paid on time every time. I don't have to worry about the fluctuations. I think I remember Jason saying this on your last podcast as well, and it's absolutely true. And I was grateful. I never went above my station in that regard, but that's all I had ever been, and I had not had the experience of having to find the bear, hunt the bear, kill the bear, skin the bear, cook the bear, eat the bear.
Everything, yes.
all of those sorts of things. And I'm definitely far more fulfilled and rewarded for the experience. I can definitely say that. And in my case, I can definitely say there's no turning back at this point. And ultimately, all of those coffees that I've had have led me to this point where I'm even here talking to you about it, because I wouldn't be here otherwise. I'd be somewhere else.
So true. And I love that that you've highlighted that, because I sometimes think when we're in the trenches and going through those really hard times, we think, oh my gosh, life's going to end. But if we hadn't gone through those tough times, good times, everything is always happening precisely as it should to lead us up to this point in time and then wherever you go next and so on. So thank you for sharing that.
No, absolutely. And I think I heard this on another podcast somewhere where someone was asked, well, would you go back and want any of your bad luck to have changed? And I forget the name of the test, but 99.9% of people say, no, I don't want a single thing changed.
Yeah.
Everything you've been through has shaped you right to this point where you are now. And even in the cases of some of the most tragic moments in people's lives, they still say, well, no, I wouldn't change a thing. I want it to be right here. I'm not doing justice to this particular test, but I can definitely say in terms of my experience that I wouldn't change a thing about how it got to this point for good and for bad.
Yeah, I can say I'm the same. I heard a lovely quote actually this morning while I was at gym. They said, when courage and authenticity intersect, that's where excellence is born. And I was like, wow, that is really powerful. So
yeah, I don't mind. That's a good
actually rewound like
mathematical formula. Yeah. And yeah, it's always interesting to hear people's mathematical formulas for life, even though it's not maths at all, but it's sort of.
It is like a formula though. Yeah, because where the two intersect, that's where excellence is born. I was like, wow, that's a really cool rewind.
I think there was someone else that I listened to recently that said that happiness is basically expectations minus experience or something.
Yeah, that's also great. I love quotes. Love them.
So exercise some neuroplasticity and lower your expectations, I think, was the long and short of it. Yeah, just expect nothing and then life's a breeze, apparently.
Apparently. Marcus, it sounds like you've always had a very a deep calling and very clear idea of where it is that you wanted to go. During those tough times where, you kind of, things weren't going quite how you thought they would, and then you kind of partnered and that didn't work. Was there, I want to ask, maybe a feeling or something in your core that said just keep going as opposed to going back and getting a job with someone else?
Yeah, I'd say one of the attributes I've been given is doggedness and stubbornness. So
you too, same.
Yeah. if something's not going my way, if it's a piece of technology, I'll bitch and moan and whinge. If it's something actually serious and meaningful in life, then I will simply say, well, that's either beyond my control and there's nothing I can do about it, but I can do this, so I'll just go over there and do that. Or it's within my control and I can go over there and do that, so I'll just do it. So the crying over spilt milk doesn't last very long, and so there's there's never really any major doubt or concern about if things aren't going my way, say in business in particular. It's just a case of being super task focused and getting on to the next thing that just needs to be done. Yeah. Knowing that there are aspects that you just simply can't control. So that doesn't bother me. And let's face it, if in business, whether you're a business owner or an employee, if those kinds of things bothered you routinely, you are going to have the most miserable experience.
Yeah, you will.
For the rest of your life. You're going to feel lonely, isolated, angry, frustrated, all of the above, all because you've made the decision to cry over every piece of spilt milk. So I reserve it for technology failing because it's inanimate. I'm not abusing anybody in particular. I cry for half a minute about it and then I move on. Usually it's a sign I should get up from my desk and go do something else. Yeah. Maybe have some water, go for a walk around the garden, anything, but just don't sit here for any longer.
Yeah, definitely. So the legal field can be very high pressured and emotionally charged and at times draining. How do you handle the weight of your clients' problems without letting it take a personal toll?
That is an age-old problem for lawyers. I see it all the time. I do my best myself with it. And I've noticed this in family law in particular. One of the benefits of having practiced in multiple areas of law, I try to see myself as a specialist in a few areas rather than a jack of all trades. Yeah. Nothing really goes well if you try to be a jack of all trades, especially in law. Dabbling is definitely not recommended. But in family law in particular, I have noticed that it is very difficult for lawyers that I've come across to separate themselves from their clients' raw emotions. They tend to do a very good job of absorbing them and then spitting them back out at the other side, whether that's the other side's lawyer or the other side being unrepresented. And I can see why that happens because you're dealing with a very emotional situation, whereas commercial negotiations for a business acquisition or even a contract dispute, you might be involved in some fairly turgid litigation over some sort of commercial dispute. They don't have that same character about them. And so I find that commercial lawyers tend to have little issue separating themselves from their clients' problems and being detached and independent, all the things that you should be as a lawyer. Whereas in family law, it's a mixed bag. The good ones, and there are many out there, they do an excellent job of it. And you are both working to minimise the pain for your clients, knowing that you each have a different idea or a different vision of utopia, but you respectfully disagree. And then there's that bit in the middle where both your clients are going to be slightly uncomfortable with the result, which is the sweet spot to know that you've more or less got a deal that's fair. Yeah, everyone can live with it and move on. But then there are a greater proportion of lawyers in family law that truly absorb every last emotion of their client. I do believe in the power of gravity in life, not just in terms of orbiting around planets and suns, but also just in terms of people finding each other. Yeah. If you've got a less than reputable person or less than decent person, they will tend to find that lawyer, that kind of lawyer that's going to take on all of those emotions and generally cause more trouble than good in a situation. And sometimes the best thing you can do as a lawyer is to just slow your own client down and say, look, no, we're not going to go down that path. Trust me, you're going to make it worse.
Yeah.
Now, if you'd like me to absorb every one of your emotions and spit them out at the other side, I can't do that, but there are other lawyers that can do that. You might feel good in the short term. I think it's not going to be very good for you long term, but it's your choice. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah.
And so I try my best to recognise all of that. You are still there to be a firm advocate for your client. You're there to, push their agenda within reason, but there's very much a case of going too far. And I think the best example that was always that had been given to me previously in life is if you're going in for heart surgery, you don't want your surgeon to be thinking about your hopes, dreams, feelings, thoughts and emotions. You want them to be pretty task focused on
what they're doing.
On fixing your heart.
That's a good point.
And you don't want them to wince every time they slice something open and go, that looks a bit gory. No, you want them to get straight into it.
Yeah, definitely.
With no reservations whatsoever because they're confident in what they do. And so I think that applies to anyone that's performing a service for another person, which is basically all of us in life.
Yeah, true.
To have that level of detachment so that you can solve the client's problems and to check yourself and say, well, am I getting a bit too invested? Because I do care. I do give a damn. I'll never be different in that regard. But if you're not careful, you can go wandering in far deeper than you ever should have.
Yeah.
To the point where you might as well be the client yourself now. And you've, as the saying goes, you've got a fool for your representation if that's the case. The client can emotionally spit out, or I'll go back. The client can spit out their emotions at the other side just as good as you can.
Yes.
You are now no longer delivering value at this point. You've got a professional service to provide, which your client is paying very good money for. And so I think the only thing I could say in response to your question there is that someone in my position needs to be as observant as they possibly can, which is easier said than done. Could I say that I've never, let my emotions get the better of me any time in my, 20 odd years of legal practice? No, absolutely. No human being can say that.
Of course.
But you try to get better at it every time. And I think I've been blessed with the guidance of lawyers more senior than me that I've worked with in the past or who I brief as barristers on certain matters where those line ball scenarios come up, and rather than shooting from the hip or making it up, you go and consult them, or they might correct something in your work and you look at it and go, I can see why they did that. Yeah. And they sort of guide you along the right path if they're if they're so minded, and if they have that level of experience, expertise, and credibility. They don't all, but when you come across some of these lawyers, when you've hit one and you learn from them. Yeah. So especially at this point in my career now, where I'm in charge of my work more than when I was in the beginning, where it was all settled by a more senior lawyer, it becomes essential to still have that guidance from older and wiser heads than yourself, and to keep learning and getting better. And if I didn't have that, I could have, again, gone wandering into all sorts of deep trouble that I could well have done without. We're all susceptible to it.
Oh, definitely. I even think law aside, as a business owner, you do need a mentor or someone who can guide you on that path, because like you said, otherwise you just kind of go on your own beaten track and heaven knows where that will take you. So I think mentorship is so important regardless.
Absolutely. And you get different mentors in your life that will guide you in different ways. So I've got another one that is a bit more cavalier and gung ho with their advice, and that's been great for me as well, to take me out of my comfort zone and say, no, go throw a little bit of caution to the wind. It's going to be fine. Yeah. Just because everyone else sits back and does nothing in this situation, maybe you should do the opposite, because this is what can happen to better your life. And so I think that's also important as well. But sometimes you need those people that are a bit more conservative to rein in those more wilder tendencies that you might have in your mind, and say, no, maybe you want to think that one through before you do that. Have you tried this instead?
Yes.
And so it's also a challenge to know the right approach and the right advice to take in any given situation.
Yeah,
but
true.
Insofar as the practice of law is concerned, that's a pretty easy take the conservative advice from an older, wiser head if you're in any doubt whatsoever. I can recommend that approach quite highly.
Marcus, I'd love to chat family law. What is the biggest misconception you think people have about family law?
There are many. One of the things that happens a lot in family law that I've noticed is I'll give my client the advice as to whatever the situation may be, you know, their entitlement, and then they will go and compare that advice to the advice of what I call an armchair family lawyer, their neighbour down the road, and you know, I don't know if your lawyer's right. Becky got 90% of everything, and I'm not sure why your lawyer reckons it's 50-50 in this particular case. And of course, we're comparing apples with oranges here. You know, this person's not qualified to go beyond your advice in this case. And for the most part, they mean well. They want their friend to do well. Why are you only getting 50? You should be getting 90. The misconception that I think links into that I see a lot is that the family law system is more favourable to women over men or men over women, depending on the individual bias or baggage that someone brings to the equation.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that stems back to the creation of the Family Court and the Family Law Act back in 1975, and which was a big transitional period at the time in terms of how society organised its affairs. Prior to that, men went out and earned the income, women stayed home exclusively, and that was the way the tasks were divided. And then that was all, I'm not going to say tipped on its head, but changed to the system we have now, where anyone can more or less choose to go out and do whatever it is they please.
Yes.
And the family law system was originally created at a time where tasks were more
specific,
more specifically divided up. This person goes and earns the income. This person raises the children, stays home, does these things. And because of that, we're going to come up with what we think is a fair way to divide everything up. Let's just talk about assets for now and not children. But we're going to come up with what we think is a fair way to divide up assets based on this criteria. And so it led to a belief that it was there, that the system was there to screw things over for men, because now they had to give up all their, and I'm putting that in quotations for people that are only listening and not watching, all of their assets that they had acquired, as if the other person in their life was just sitting there as a picture on the wall, having contributed or done nothing. And so there's definitely been a lot of that. But then also in the beginning, there was a far greater ability for income earners to not disclose all of the assets they had acquired, to hide things or to bank them away through trusts and all sorts of other complex structures. And so a lot of non-income earners, or women in this case, would go, well, the system's designed to just, you know, keep them rich at my expense. And ultimately, the system's not really designed to favour one or the other. There is no such bias or tendency there, but people still maintain this misconception to this day that it's designed to favour men over women or women over men, or, you know, any of that kind of stuff. Whereas I can safely say, in my experience, that it is designed to cause pain to both. And both would be well advised to try and avoid the system as much as possible and work something out. And a lot of people don't understand when it comes to family law, it is a public system, much like the public health system.
Yes.
If everybody is going to be able to access it equally, there's going to be a shortfall in your level of access to that system. So the other thing that people don't understand, and they just about fall out of their chair for a second time after getting the fee estimate, of course, as to what it costs to get to trial, they then fall out of their chair when they think, well, I'm going to fight this to the end and, bugger that person, they're my worst.
There's so much emotion as well, isn't
there?
A
lot of emotion. You say, by the way,
gosh.
the waiting list for a trial, once you've started proceedings, once you've had a busted conciliation conference where you couldn't settle, the waiting list after that's about 3 to 4 years.
Oh, my gosh.
And so they then go, what do you mean? I said, well, there isn't a judge just waiting for you to come along
to get divorced,
to provide you with personalised service. It doesn't work like that.
It's the reality of it, yeah.
And so that's another misconception, and they think, okay, maybe I should think about settling a little bit harder than I've been thinking before. So, yeah, those are the big misconceptions, and I think the one thing I would say, and I'm crossing jurisdictions here, but if anyone is still minded to think that the family law system favours women over men, let's just say. I would give the example of Adele, the famous singer.
Oh, yes.
Can't say that I'm familiar with all of her songs.
It's okay, don't lie.
Heard enough of them in passing. And undeniable talent that's made hundreds of millions of dollars, I would estimate.
Yeah.
And she was married to a fellow who was less talented, less wealthy, had contributed, as far as I'm aware, very little to the asset pool, and was entitled to half of it, give or take, as far as I'm aware through news stories. I haven't read anything official. And, well, that's just how the system works.
How it works, yeah.
If you're in a jurisdiction which allows for more or less a 50-50 split in those kinds of situations, then it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female.
No, the same applies.
Women go out and earn just as much as men, and a lot of women do come into my office and are stunned that they need to share that much of their wealth with their former significant other.
Yeah.
And that's just how it works. That's the system. So I think that just really drives home the point that the system is not designed to favour one gender over another. Yeah.
Marcus, I'd love to know, have you perhaps got some practical tips or advice? Because obviously when you meet someone, you're starstruck, you got love hearts in your eyes, there's a lot of emotion involved. And I found through going through my own separation, there's a lot of things that I was not educated on. So perhaps for our audience, what are the key things? So when you do meet someone, I was told perhaps keep a journal of sort of key events, because again, you're kind of just like, oh my gosh, I'm in love, and like everything else falls to the wayside. And next thing you know, it's 10 years down the track and you have no idea what you did the first year you got together, right? Or when who moved in where, which is what they ask you. Have you got maybe some key things you could share with us? Practical advice, heaven forbid someone finds himself in a situation of separation, of how they could best, I want to say, be educated on the topic and to be prepared. Again, if heaven forbid they find themselves in this situation.
Yeah, and I think the practical tips are better than any hard and fast legal advice, especially at the beginning point. I'm going to preface all of this with the usual legal caveat.
Of course, yes, Piers. I wanted to, and I went
legal
straight
advice.
into
This
combo.
is all just general chit chat, and it's not designed for one's individual circumstances. All the usual stuff you hear when talking to an insurance company. Just insert that in here.
Thank you. I was supposed to do it in the beginning, but I got way sidetracked.
And I will hereby apply this retrospectively to everything I've said before up until this point as well, because I can and feel like it. But the hard and fast law isn't really going to save you in any regard. And one thing I wouldn't recommend, and this is just my personal opinion, one thing I would not recommend anyone do when they meet someone, they're head over heels in love, is to start keeping a journal or a diary. Go enjoy yourself.
That's what they told me. I'm like, okay, sure.
No.
We had dinner at 6 p.m.
Yeah. I washed the dishes.
He left his shoes under the table. I'm joking.
For the 8th time in our relationship, he has washed them once. That means I have now made 88.8% of the non-financial contributions to the kitchen.
Completely.
Yeah, no, don't. Yeah. It's not that formulaic,
Sure.
even when things don't quite go right. And one, in my opinion, should go out and thoroughly enjoy themselves at that point. These times in our lives don't come along too often. They should be enjoyed. One should live in the moment and be present for it, for what it is, regardless of where it goes from there. And a great way to ruin that is to start taking notes and keeping diaries in it. I would say it creates a defeatist mindset where you're now planning too much for the exit. But having said all of that, it's very similar to business. People acquire a business, they fall head over heels in love with that business. They go into a partnership with one or more other people, and they're not thinking about failure. They're just going, "How awesome is this? We've got a new toy. Let's go play." And relationships are similar in principle when no one's thinking of how it might look on the way out. So a lot of people in business, for example, won't set up a shareholders agreement. They won't think about things like tag along and drag along rights and what that means and how that can administer the scenario where one person wants to get out.
Yeah.
Should the others have a right of first refusal to buy that share, or can they sell to anyone in the public at large? And so a bit of consideration should be given at a general level when it comes to personal relationships and family law. Absolutely, but you wouldn't. In some cases, it's appropriate to consider the old prenup, or what they call them, binding financial agreements here.
Yeah.
But I think a few practical things can make life a lot easier. And these aren't hard and fast rules, but one thing I've always said to people, and this is not legal advice by any stretch of the imagination, is consider people that are in your financial ballpark. If one of your priorities is to avoid a bitter property division dispute down the track in the family court, for example. So if someone's earning $500,000 a year, they then go ahead and date someone that's earning $40,000 a year.
Yeah.
A person with $500,000 a year has millions of dollars of net wealth and assets. Person on $40,000 a year doesn't have two twigs to rub together to their name. You then have children. You're together for 7 years. The children are, 4, 5, 6 years old. You are going to have to accept the reality that a significant chunk of the asset pool, which you've more or less contributed 90 to 100% of, is now going to move over to that former significant other. That's just a reality of life. There's nothing you can do about that. They're not going to get zero.
Yeah.
There's no scenario that I've ever come across where a person earning the $40,000 a year gets zero.
No.
So one mechanism is to be with people that are in your financial ballpark. Doesn't have to be exact, but something in the ballpark, so that if things don't quite go as planned, everyone's got more or less similar expectations as to where it's going to go after that. Now, there's still negotiation to be had, but it's a far easier negotiation than otherwise. The other thing that I've found is there still is a practical difference between marriage and de facto relationships. If you fall over head over heels in love, go to Vegas, you've been together for 3 days, and you get married before a midget Elvis in Las Vegas, you are now married in the eyes of the law. And the full consequences of marriage now apply if that marriage were to end, maybe on the 4th day, maybe on the 4th year, whatever the case may be, and now you are in the system from day one. Whereas the alternative, which is, how about we don't get married under those circumstances or at all for the time being.
With the midget Elvis.
With the midget Elvis or some such other character of flair. And what if we just let the relationship run its course naturally, however it happens to run. At some point, you will fall under the definition of a de facto couple.
Sure.
There is no hard and fast definition. It's under legislation. I won't bore you with the shopping list. For the most part, people use the old, spend 3-4 nights together. That's usually a good sort of, over the thumb starting point. Once that happens and you are now a de facto couple, there is a period of time from that point within which the family court will not get involved. It's a 2-year sort of limitation period. And should that be the case for your de facto relationship, that more or less gives you a probationary period, if you will, and I hate reducing personal relationships to that sort of thing, but so that you can let some of that pixie dust settle down and find out, okay, who have I got here as my significant other? How's this going? Is this going to work? Are we both really sure about this? Is this headed in the right direction? And if it is, nothing's stopping you getting married after that. Nothing's stopping you doing whatever it is you like to do. But if we're being practical about it, which is the opposite of romantic, but if we're being practical about it, there's this opening where you can have a free roll of the dice, so to speak, to find out if this is absolutely the right thing for both of you, or there's option B to Vegas and getting married right here and right now. Why would you not take the free roll of the dice?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one should never decline a free roll of the dice, no matter how low the prospects of success are. If it's free, you roll and you see what happens. And so taking just that little bit of an edge off at the beginning can make a big difference at the end and stop you from running aground in the family law system.
Yeah.
And look, it's not a bulletproof, it's not a fail-safe, but by geez, does it manage a lot of low-lying risk.
Of course.
And I think that those are the big things that I typically advise or discuss with my clients if they come to me at the beginning of a relationship going, right, what do I need to think about before?
So people actually do that as well?
Rarely.
Yeah.
But some
pretty sensible, right?
It's very sensible. Lawyers aren't cheap, but the way I've always described this to my clients and thought about it, it's the classic law of diminishing returns. The best $500 you're going to spend is on that initial consult with the lawyer where they bring you up to speed with a lot of things you weren't aware of. And then after that, you probably get good return on investment for the next, let's say, $2,000 or $3,000. Maybe you've got a job that needs to be done, a problem to be solved, some written advice to be given. If you're in a more protracted situation, every dollar after that tends to be on a diminishing scale, and in some cases on a heavily diminishing scale real quick.
Sure.
So you could do a lot worse in life than if you're not sure about something, in this case family law and the kind of things you should be doing at the beginning of a relationship. Go spend an hour with a lawyer. Yeah. Spend the $500. They'll probably say plus GST, so that's $550. And pepper them with questions. Yeah. And a good lawyer should have very clear and direct answers for you, even in a general sense. You know, they're not able to solve the world's problems for you, but they can really get you pointed in the right direction. And that's $500 well spent. So no, it doesn't happen too often, but it's something people should consider. And then, of course, there are times where someone will. And this isn't just with lawyers, but there are times in life where people will come to you for advice, listen to the advice and go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and then just go back to doing the exact opposite, which they intended to do in the first place.
True. That's very true.
And all you can do is smile and, you know what, I've probably done that dozens and hundreds of times to other people in my life. So that's just how it works. Sometimes you have to learn the hard way.
Yeah, I do think it's a great idea, though, to kind of be set up from the get-go and kind of go in sensible. and blinded by love as opposed to just being blinded by love. So thank you, Marcus. Marcus, how can business owners protect their business during a divorce?
That's a very good question with a fairly direct answer.
Sure.
They generally cannot.
Okay.
The family court is one of those courts that has a level of power that no other courts have in the country. Very specific power. Of course, they only have that power only comes up when there's a family law situation, let's say. You know, it's not the highest court in Australia like the High Court is, which is the ultimate authority on practically everything. But the family court can unwind and unpick a trust if it needs to.
Sure.
And so in terms of a business owner protecting their business, there's nothing specific you can do that will just take the business off the table, full stop, that is ironclad and bulletproof. Now, you could have a prenup, a binding financial agreement that says, okay, well, I brought this business into the relationship, and so everything I do with this business and its growth is mine. Everything else over here will share 60-40 in your favour, let's say, to make up for the fact that I'm going to get the growth in the business from here on forward. And if it's in the ballpark of fair and just and reasonable and that sort of thing, then you've got less of a chance of the family court setting aside that binding financial agreement. You can't write up a binding financial agreement, for example, that says I'm going to get 100%, you're going to get 0 because I'm the best and you're the worst, and sign here, initial there, date there. It doesn't work.
Sounds like something you do before you go to Vegas.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
The family court will set that kind of a binding financial agreement aside very easily. So there's only bits and pieces around the edge that you could really do in terms of protecting a business, so to speak, from a relationship breakdown, because what will happen is the client, so to speak, in this case, or the owner of the business, we're assuming they own shares now in this business, those shares will have to be valued.
Sure.
A licensed business valuer will likely have to come in, say, right, let's go through the books, let's come up with a valuation methodology, let's value this business and value these shares that this person has, and it goes now into the value of the asset pool for family law purposes, and it's just thrown on the pile. I think that's the other misconception, to go back to one of your last questions that people have is, oh, these assets don't get included, do they? Yes, they do. All assets get included, literally everything.
They do.
The family court is fairly crude in its method, and I can understand why. It doesn't want to go into nitty-gritty details about who disappointed who and all of this sort of thing when it comes to asset division. They will just simply say, right, where are all the assets, where are all the liabilities, clump them into one big fat pile, including superannuation. Yes, superannuation's included. And they will take the net amount and then apply the wisdom of Solomon and decide, right, where do we chop it?
Yeah.
Based on contributions and those sorts of things. And how can we move things around to achieve that percentage split? Solomon's wanted to split the baby in half, but in this case, that split can be 70, 30, 60, 40, whatever is appropriate for the situation.
Or head in the body.
Yeah, exactly. So it's everything's on the table and included in that regard. But if you go back to those practical measures I was discussing now, I would say that that's something business owners should keep in mind. Right. Is my proposed significant other in my financial ballpark?
Yeah, it's a good point.
And I'm in theirs. If so, it's not going to be a big deal for me to keep my business. Maybe they've got one themselves that they'd like to keep.
Yeah.
And everything we build together will just split down the middle. And you can put that into a binding financial agreement if people want that kind of comfort. And have you not rushed into getting married within 3 days and you've actually let some time go by to absorb the situation, that will generally keep you out of trouble. As long as you don't get caught with the emotional wind and literally just do whatever comes to you.
Yeah.
Then you can minimise your chances of harm down the track. And I think that's probably the best thing, because there's not really any crafty legal documents and drafting one can engage in or use the services of a lawyer for that's going to work there. I can't, I'm sure well, there are some lawyers that are listening to this that might be saying, "No, I've got the solution for this." They, come and see me. Maybe you should get them on the podcast and see what they have to think. But I tend to find that the more crafty you try to be with this sort of thing, you end up being too clever by half, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And even if you set things up like discretionary trusts and those sorts of things with a wide range of discretionary beneficiaries, of which you're one, that's going to tend to be given fairly short shrift if every distribution under that discretionary trust has gone to you anyway and literally to no one else. All I can say is good luck with that in front of the family court. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcus. Lots of great takeaways there. I would love to know more about your other business, EquiClaim.
Yes, that's an enterprise that I'm quite passionate about, and a brilliant idea of my colleague Ron Ung, who discovered that there was a problem for society that was not being solved by anyone. So we had a few discussions and decided to go down this path and set up this business along with another colleague and friend of ours, Diana Franicevic. And it's been a bit of time in the making, but we're up and running at the moment. And ultimately, what we discovered was that since the Banking Royal Commission back in 2017 to 2019, where they supposedly unearthed all the sins that the banks were committing, and financial advisors, wealth managers, and all sorts of other financial services providers. Since then, people weren't fully aware of what had changed in the system and what they could do to solve injustices that they couldn't previously deal with, especially in terms of the focus of EquiClaim when it came to banks. So in the old days, if the bank gave you poor service, breached your privacy, or gutted you a bit of interest, it wasn't worth chasing. You would have to chase that matter through the courts. You'd have to run the risk of losing and maybe paying legal fees if you lost, and they would have big bad lawyers from big bad law firms on the other side, and very easy to get done in on technicalities there if you're not minded at running litigation, even if it's a fairly small amount. So most people would just say, "Oh, look, this is too hard," or I can't do anything about this. And people still to this day have that mentality when it comes to banks. But the great thing since the Banking Royal Commission, the Hayne Royal Commission it was called, was the great thing that came out of that was the establishment of AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. And there already was such a thing, but it was just a membership body that could tut and poo-poo financial service providers if they did the wrong thing, but it had no actual teeth, no authority. It couldn't make binding decisions, and it was a rather pointless outfit. And then there was also the Financial Ombudsman's Office, which similarly couldn't really do much. So the Royal Commission said, look, we're going to combine these two offices together. We're going to keep calling it AFCA, but we're going to give it a jurisdiction and some rules, let it function more or less like a tribunal that can make binding decisions. And the great thing is if the bank loses at the end of the entire process, they can't appeal the decision against the individual complainant. They can appeal it against AFCA and go nuts in the federal court after that, but they have to pay the individual complainant or remedy the situation for the individual complainant and then deal with AFCA separately after that. So, and the other great thing for the individual complainant is they win, lose or draw, they don't pay any costs. There's no filing fee to lodge a complaint. It can be done fairly easily online. There's a process that has to be followed to get to a final binding decision. But even if they lose, like I said, no costs are paid.
Yeah.
So with EquiClaim, we realised that most people had no idea that AFCA existed. Most people had no idea of the types of scenarios that they could experience, which they could bring before AFCA and get a result. And so we set up the business to help people on a no-win, no-fee basis, where we only take our fee at the very end of the process once the cheque is cut by the bank. Then we take our fee, we give the client the rest.
Sure.
And we found that there were an incredible number of people that once they were made aware of this system, of their rights, that immediately came up with a scenario going, hang on a sec, this has happened to me or this happened to my friend. And this was just within our immediate network. And so we have extrapolated that across Australia, there are thousands and thousands upon people that have rights in this respect that can be exercised. They just need to be aware of what can be done. And they have two choices. They can either run the complaint themselves, the system is designed for that, or if it's too much effort, too much hassle, they can engage a paid representative such as ourselves and you know, pay a cut of the winnings to us only if we're successful. But even just educating people that if they so choose and they're so minded, they can run these complaints themselves if they feel like it. The system is there, it is accessible. People are encouraged to try themselves if they're minded. We only want to get involved if we can deliver value for someone, you know, convenience, or if someone's overwhelmed by the system. And any type of system like this that's designed as a self-service type of system can easily overwhelm people. And so that's where the service of EquiClaim can benefit people. I'll just wrap up in terms of describing EquiClaim with an example of how this actually can and does work. And I keep giving the example of a Big Four bank that was lending to a client of mine for a commercial property that they'd acquired. The settlement went through. They got their commercial property, happy days. And 3 days later, the client came back to me and said, can the bank do this? And I scrolled down, had a look, opened up the attachment, and the bank manager had written to them and said, look, we forgot to take $300 out of the proceeds of settlement for some government charge. We're just letting you know we've deducted it from your account now. Have a nice day.
Wow.
And the letter was very non-specific about what government charge, why it had been missed, or which part of what contract they were entitled to do any of this. And so the simple answer is no, the bank cannot do that. No. And they may well have had some legal entitlement to that charge at settlement. And if they had have written to the customer and said, look, sorry, we forgot, we're going to have to do this, you know, could you give us your authority? They probably would have done better, because most people tell you, all right, fine, take it, whatever.
Because there's so much that's going in and out.
What can you do? Yeah. But sometimes, especially if you're a Big Four bank, you have to accept that maybe you've just lost out on this one. You know, you overlooked it. People generally aren't going to want to do the bank a favour for $300, legal entitlement or not, and you would have done well to kiss it goodbye. And so I contacted the bank manager that wrote the letter. I think it was by email, and I said, look, you've got one chance to refund that money, and if you don't, I'm going to have to take the matter further, I'm afraid. And this bank manager probably wouldn't have been aware of who or what AFCA was or how things had changed. And so he wrote back to me fairly politely and said, well, no, we're legally entitled to take this money. We've done that now. It was for a legitimate charge, and, you know, contract this, contract that, we can do it.
Sure.
Have a nice day, take a running jump. And so about half an hour later, I had spoken to my client and already commenced an AFCA claim online. It was that quick and that easy. Within a week after that, once you lodge an AFCA complaint, AFCA will notify the bank straight away. And they won't notify the bank manager. They'll notify the bank's external dispute resolution team, who take these matters a bit more seriously for obvious reasons and very much know what they're doing. And if the bank's done wrong, their job is to try and solve the problem without it escalating any further. So within a week, I got a call from someone in that team from this particular bank. I don't know why I'm not naming the bank. It was NAB. It's not the most secretive thing that I've ever come across in life.
Yeah.
And the fellow said, "Oh, yeah, look, we can see where your client might have a problem. What if we paid them $1,500? Would that solve the problem?" And I said, "Oh, look, I suspect it will. Let me take instructions."
Yeah.
And at that point, there's no real haggling to be done. That's a reasonable fair figure for a scenario like this. There's a pretty standard. It's not written anywhere, but there's a fairly standard amount for a particular sin of the bank that everyone accepts is more or less in the ballpark and good enough. The client was happy. So in this particular case, the client not only got their $300 back, they got another $600 for literally doing nothing.
Wow.
And then EquiClaim took its $600 fee, which was 40% of the amount, and everyone was the better for it.
Yeah.
Except the bank.
Of course, but at least it got resolved.
Nobody's crying for the bank, of course.
Yeah.
So, so there are countless good news stories just like that one with this process, and that's why the three of us are very passionate about this business in terms of being able to help people basically get something that they never would have gotten for themselves anyway, through a lack of awareness or just a lack of desire to go and follow the process through. Yeah. And so it's come a long way in the last year. There's a lot of setup work and establishment for all the business systems and processes, as no doubt you and all the listeners here are aware of when it comes to setting up a business. It's one thing to have the idea. It's another thing to implement and execute that idea exactly. And so, and especially when it's a side hustle in the beginning, as all of these things are, and people are going, "So how's this business going?" "Oh, why aren't you moving along a bit faster?" Or this and that. And you go, "Well, let me tell you about the realities of what we need to do to get this thing off the ground." And
there's only 24 hours in a day. Yeah, I've learned.
Absolutely. But yeah, we're very happy with how it's going. So yeah, thank you for giving me the chance to let everyone know a little bit more about it.
Of course. Marcus, now I know you love cooking. I heard you explaining to Jason and Jace from Corp Cloud.
That's right, I remember.
Your duck dish, and I was like, wow, sounds incredible, but what a process. If I made it, it turned out to be a beef sausage. But anyway, I would love to know, if you could prepare a meal to represent your journey, your business journey, what would it be and why?
Oh, I love these out-of-the-box questions. I'm just trying to cycle through all my meals. And I've got to think about what my journey, how would I describe my journey? It's varied, it's rewarding.
So maybe a dessert?
Oh, I'm not a big dessert cook. I do make a mean creme brulee.
Oh, nice. Where is the sample for today, by the way?
I'll have to bring one in next time. I'm not sure if creme brulee describes my journey. I mean, hard on the outside and tasty and soft on the inside. But I think I don't know why, but I just keep coming back to like a tomahawk steak or a nice beef.
Oh, it is good.
Wagyu beef with a red wine bordelaise sauce.
Nice.
How and why that describes my journey, I don't know. I guess just that it tastes good.
Yeah, definitely.
and
very satisfying.
I'd probably describe that about my journey in life. I've been incredibly fortunate to have lived the life I have so far. I've been incredibly lucky. I know it gets thrown out a lot, almost as a bit of a hackneyed platitude, but I am absolutely grateful for everything that I have. There's nothing more I could or would want in that regard. And anytime a steak with a well-cooked red wine sauce gets put on the plate at home, I think the same thing to myself. There's nothing more I could want to eat right now.
Yeah, and is that why you listen to Eye of a Tiger as well?
Well, I don't even listen. I haven't listened to that song in such a long time.
That does candy.
Yeah, I'm going to start listening to it again a bit more. But I think that's the one thing that I do get satisfaction out of. In this case, Candy, who works with me at Procopio Legal, who has just recently embarked on her journey in law later in life, having succeeded in business as a GM and CEO of numerous companies, highly successful, highly intelligent, that has now chosen to start something extremely challenging at this point in her life. And so my job, among other things, is to help her along to reach her goals as well. And so if someone that you're helping along, and in many ways in law, you shield and protect, a new lawyer to the game from a number of scenarios in practice that can come along. The same way that I was protected and shielded in the beginning, because you have to figure out how everything works before you can spread your wings and go flying. And so when someone that you've helped describes your help in that manner, it is the ultimate compliment. It means a lot. So, like I said, it caught me on the hop. I didn't know that was the answer and that I was going to walk into that today. So I'm going to think about that some more and what it means as well. But it definitely means a lot to me. And I think that is the kind of approach that I've heard many lawyers take to helping their clients is that, and it's the feedback a lot of clients give when they're happy with their lawyers is, you took the brunt of what I was copping before, and saved me a lot of stress along the way. And I'm truly the grateful clients are always grateful for that aspect of the service. Yeah. Along with regular communication. They like that too. If there's one thing that people complain about lawyers a lot, it's when they go missing for 2 or 3 months without explanation, and I can completely understand why that would frustrate the absolute
that's worrying
hell out of a client. So yeah, that's probably how I'd answer that question.
Great. Marcus, one last question. If you could rewind back to where you very first started Procopio Legal, what is one bit of advice you give yourself?
Yeah, the thought-provoking questions are great. You got to stop what you're doing. You can't just fire off at these ones. I like them.
Yeah, good.
What advice would I give to myself? It might not be any different to the advice I implicitly gave myself at the time. Keep doing what you're doing. If this is what you truly want, you will get to where you want to be.
Yeah, great.
Back yourself. Just keep backing yourself. And there were times where I was wavering, and I had the benefit of other people telling me, no, just keep backing yourself. You can do this. And I think that's another thing that dawned on me from all of that. Not that I was completely ignorant, but I found a much greater level of appreciation was for the involvement and presence and generosity of other people in life.
Yeah, so true.
And it really made it clear that as much as I like to think of myself as more of a leopard and not a lion, the reality is without all these other beings in our life would have no meaning. We would be able to achieve literally nothing.
So true.
And you wouldn't even have the teaspoon in your top drawer to stir your coffee with, along with the coffee itself, if it wasn't for an incredible chain of people putting in a lot of effort. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that fact in humanity. We get very insular and isolated, and we think we're so strong and independent, and literally every aspect of our lives is dependent
So true.
on everybody else on this planet practically. And so starting my business and going through the challenges that I did really brought that to the fore in a very profound way that hadn't been before.
Yeah. Marcus, thank you so much for all that you've shared. Where is the best place for our audience to go should they wish to connect with you?
They can find me on LinkedIn very easily.
Perfect.
If someone wants to know more about EquiClaim, they can go to equiclaim.com.au, spelled EQUI claim.com.au. If they want to know more about my law firm, they can go to Procopio legal.com.au. I might as well spell my surname, Procopio. I'm used to it. New website coming out soon, which your lovely studio has assisted us with.
Yeah, and your rebrand, very exciting.
Designing all the rebrand material for. So thank you very much for that. We're very excited.
Most welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
With how that's all going to look. I think that's pretty much it. I'm not on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. So LinkedIn is usually the best way to get a hold of me. Otherwise, my email address is on my website. People can email me anytime they like. But otherwise, if you just type Marcus Lawyer in Perth, you'll find me real quick on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Yeah. There you go. Great SEO. We'll definitely pop all the links in the show notes as well. Marcus, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for all the valuable advice that you've given us, and always great to chat with you. And again, it's just really nice to meet someone who is, genuine and heart-centered like you are. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Tracy. Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Most welcome.